Welcome to DVR Club, the AV Club's TV recap show. I'm television editor Erik Adams, and alongside me
is assistant editor Becca James.
And we're back. We're talking Hannibal. Hannibal's back after a long time jump. So top storylines this week may as well just be new storylines because we're 3 years in the future. We're at the start of a completely different Thomas Harris novel. Becca, how do you feel about this transition into this new story?
It's expected. I'm very familiar with Red Dragon. I did have to ask you how many years it had been, though. I missed that. So it's 3 years, which makes sense for some of the newer characters we see. It's not as high of a note for me as the last episode.
I loved it. I thought it was like a great start to this secondary story within the third season, and also kind of showed how well the show can kind of shift gears. And I think the show has been really smart about acknowledging that the viewers know what's going to happen in Red Dragon. They're already familiar so much with this source material. Even as someone who knows what's coming, Becca, did you find there was anything that was really grabbing you about this episode?
I think this episode is a good setup for the ones to follow. They condensed it really well. I still think, even though I've seen it almost shot for shot before, the bedroom scene when Will gets back into everything was still done very well.
I cut Mr. Leeds' throat as he lies asleep beside his wife. I shoot Mrs. Leeds. The bullet enters to the right of her navel and lodges in her lumbar spine.
It's very eerie, and walking through the crime kind of brings you back to how the episodes used to be.
Alana Bloom is still alive after this time jump. Were you upset to see that?
3 years later. Yeah, how has nobody gotten to her yet? She's also Hannibal's psychiatrist. I don't know, is she giving out medicine? Well, anyways.
Well, probably. I mean,
I don't know.
He's in a facility.
Regardless, how is that allowed? They have a sexual history. But okay, there she is.
And I think the fact that nobody has gotten to her is because the one person who could get to her is behind glass in this insane cell in Chilton's hospital. Did you find that holding place where Hannibal is to be as absurd as I did? I couldn't tell if it was actually just in his memory palace.
Same. That's what I thought at first, but then when we kept revisiting it, I got the idea that it really is decorated that way. Which, yeah, that doesn't match anything. It made me go back to Red Dragon or go back to Silence of the Lambs, where he was always kind of in, the shittiest cell at the end.
So speaking of Silence of the Lambs, of Red Dragon, of Manhunter, of all of these many iterations of the Hannibal Lecter saga, there's a lot of great meta moments within this episode that I wanted to take a quick look at, especially in the conversation between Chilton and Hannibal.
What is the subject of your new book, Frederick?
The Tooth Fairy. I find folks are a bit more interested in him.
That's just a smart acknowledgement and possibly a exercise of self-awareness. The show showing that it realizes that its time is probably short, and it's making both a wink to the audience and kind of jabbing itself in the ribs a little bit. Do you think that kind of joke would get a good reaction from the devoted fandom of Hannibal?
I think so. I think part of that fandom is knowing that Brian Fuller seems to care and be aware of what's being said about the show. I think he's always very on top of that.
You were not as big of a fan of the "this is my design" scene in this episode as I was, primarily because of your familiarity with the source material. I thought it was probably the scariest that the show's been in a while because of the long stretches of silence in it. And there's a lot of scenes in this episode that have that. This is a show that loves to talk. And so for the Tooth Fairy to be posing in front of the mirror for so long in complete silence with the pinging and the ponging of Brian Reitzel's score, or Will slowly going through the house and kind of panning his flashlight across the crime scene and seeing the corpses in that, it brings a little bit of the unknown back into the show for me at least. I don't know if that, if knowing where it's going takes any of that thrill of the unknown out of it for you.
I think they'll switch it up just enough where it'll still grab viewers. Like I said, I think Brian Fuller's very aware of what he's doing with his audience in mind, and so he obviously knows there's a large chunk of that audience that has watched, Red Dragon 12 times.
And that awareness is kind of what I wanted to talk about in Speculation Corner. This episode, it's a big reset. It's kind of like the pilot for a whole different show. To me, it feels like a dry run for a potential Hannibal miniseries. That's one of the many possibilities that have been raised. If there's anything beyond the end of this season, it could be a miniseries, it could be a movie. Did you feel like it was a nice, refreshing new step? And also, where do you see this version of Red Dragon going?
I thought it was a good refresher. I'm excited that this episode ended with Will asking for permission to go see Hannibal.
It's a mindset I need to recover. I have to see Hannibal.
I'm glad you brought up the Will-Hannibal connection because, we see scenes of Will with his new wife. He's very reluctant to leave her, but the spark's just not there, right? Like he needs Hannibal to fuel that passion.
It's been 3 years. It's going to be an explosion when they meet again.
Oh yeah,
I'm so
I know,
excited.
right? Oh my gosh. Well, that about does it for Hannibal and for DVR Club this week. I'm Erik Adams.
And I'm Becca James.
Goodbye.
Bye.